Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the India Crossing Over Nepal Ecosystem Exchange webinar. This is one of the occasions where I really want the webinars to be able to show hands of who's coming from where. But in the interest of time, we're probably not going to do a poll. But I believe that we're expecting at least people coming from 2 to 3 different continents. So that's very exciting. And my name is Taylor Wong, so I'll be your host today. I'm the International Strategy Manager of LSE Generate. So how today's is going to go is, I understand that a lot of the people from the crowd today are actually from the LSE ecosystem. So you may have received the education there, or you may have been a visiting fellows or a short course that you've studied before. So we just really love to, once again, reinforce some of the ideas around what we do, because we know that not everyone knows about the Entrepreneurship Center just yet. And then the next thing would be also that we'll have our ambassadors coming from the India chapter and the Nepalese chapter to talk you through a little bit about themselves, as well as the speakers that they've decided to invite, which are very, very exclusive, because at least one of them, I believe, don't always do public engagement. So we're very honored to have them here today. Great. So what LSE Generate is, I would like to maybe give you the story in 1 to 2 minutes that in the beginning of maybe LSE Careers, which is the careers team servicing everyone that wants to find a job later on after graduating. 11 years ago, my manager, the head of LSE Generate, has decided to create a spin-off as part of the wider careers team, because of the fact that a lot of the people coming from LSE, they have a polarized kind of view about the career paths that they want to go down to. Some people are very naturally engaged with policy making, creative or cultural space, whereas there are other people that would just be naturally drawn into the financial institutions or working in the financial sector. And she was just very keen to kind of demonstrate there's a third part, or almost building a community for people that would love to be entrepreneurial, a bit more different. So then that's how LSE Generate was basically born. And fast forward today, we've become almost a flagship entrepreneurship center of the entire university. We support and service anybody that's studied with us before, as well as alumni, kind of local ecosystem players that we work with consistently throughout different activities, collaborations. And additionally as well, we recognize that a lot of people are underrepresented in the journey. So we're kind of bespoke and then creating a lot of different programs and then trying to secure fundings for them as well, just to give them something to start off with. And a lot of the startups that we support also have a very strong alignment with the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, which means that everything that they're doing is really striving forward to the betterment of society. And I'm glad to tell you as well that this year we've already basically won the Times Higher Education Awards as the most outstanding entrepreneur university of the UK. So I imagine that some of you, if you haven't been in touch with LSE for quite some time, then this is a great news for you guys to hear about. And a quick look as well, since we've started our own contribution as well as the alum ecosystem, among hundreds and thousands of alumni that we have, which a lot of them would be active investors across all assets classes. 15K of them at least self-identify as active founders. So that's quite a lot of people. And then collectively, they've already created historically at least 86 billion in US dollars for exit value, and more to come, as well as raised accumulatively 24 billion in VC funding since 2017. Because of that, and the fact that a lot of people actually start a business 3 to 5 years after graduation, we understand that we have a very high proportion of international alumni, which is over 70% actually, comparing to all the universities in the UK. So we have started setting up a lot of international chapters and been building that since 3 years ago. And we have now expanded across 15 locations, and we're adding 5 more as well in South Asia. So Malaysia, Singapore, Nepal, as well as Thailand. And then in New Delhi, we're reviving the chapter 2. The next thing would be, a lot of you may have heard or may not have heard of Houghton Street Ventures, which is a C fund that we have established just a few years ago. The primary goal, as well as the primary portfolio target is really LSE founder startups. So at least one of the co-founders or in the founding team has to be an LSE alum. They're industry agnostic. They go all the way from C funding to Series B. So for the younger generation or like entrepreneurs that are just starting out, they're quite keen to support them via like mentoring, as well as giving like knowledge transfer and helping them to build connections as well. Whereas like for the more established founders, they will be looking into like maybe lead investment as well as like kind of like coming in as well for business expansion to support them in that way. So any one of you, if you're interested, if you're LSE affiliated, you're more than welcome to connect with them, or you can like drop us an email so that we can help you out on that front. Whilst you're overseas as well, there are business clinics as well as growth clinic that you can participate in, which is completely free of charge. It is led by entrepreneurs in residence who are people who are industry veterans. They have personally actually helped to raise investment or maybe leading a company to break records in sales. So it's a great service that's always available for you. Again, in London, in Lisbon, we also have like free co-working spaces you can access to, as well as we do these like social tracks and boot camps across different countries. I think the next one is going to be in Paris. So that's quite exciting for us to do a sustainability social track, bring people out there to have a very immersive experience to actually like get to know everyone, and the political as well as the economical climate of like the startups that are operating in. The next thing will also be community cluster. So we run regular meetups for a lot of people, which if you've fallen into any of the protected characteristics, you may be quite interested into actually coming to kind of like connect with other founders that are like-minded, also sharing the same journey that you may or may not be. Last but not least, we also have the funding competitions. And this year is the first year that we're running a continental pitching competition across South Asia, across a few different chapters, which means every chapter will be bringing candidates to pitch representing their own country, but then we'll only select a few winners. And that's something that's upcoming in June. So we'll be starting to call for applications in May. So definitely pay attention to it. If you have an idea that you wish to validate, whether you win or not, you'll still receive a lot of like mentoring, intense support from us, as well as getting like great feedback too. Now, this is just a map around the international chapters. We're really aiming to set out there to provide you with a lot of non-standard experiential education opportunities. So for those who are on the call that may not be coming from the LSE circle, it's completely fine, because a lot of the things that we do, such as this webinar, is all around like knowledge exchange. So a lot of it is actually publicly available too. So do stay in touch. And when we're hosting local events, when we're actually physically there with an ambassador supporting you, you will be given the opportunity to come to some of the events too. Every chapter do run regular events, whether it be virtual or in person, catering to all sorts of crowds. These are just some pictures for some of the team members that have gone over to South Asia in the last couple of months, visiting alumni, as well as like creating a few impactful events on the ground. So for example, this is a UN Women panel that we've done in Thailand. Now, the next thing would be, like I said, I've talked a lot around the ambassadors that we have in different chapters. We have the New Delhi one, which is Janaya and Sishir. Sishir is a very well-known ESG expert in Delhi. And then Janaya is a person that's running a gourmet company that's striving to kind of create like zero food waste. So if any one of you is actually interested, you're looking to relocate to a different city, you're more than welcome to connect with them. Like they will be almost the faces for LSE Generate. And then the next one would be joining with me today is Amigo and Sharant from Mumbai chapter and Nepal chapter. So I think what I would do from now would be giving them a chance to maybe briefly introduce themselves, as well as really telling you the reason why they've decided to invite the two prominent speakers that we have in the room with us today. So we'll start with Amigo.
Perfect. Taylor, thank you. And thanks for everyone who made some time to be in this event here. So my name is Amigo, and I always have to reiterate that, but that is my real name, Amigo. There's a long story behind it. I started my career with my first job was investment banking in JP Morgan Chase in New York. I did that for about 3 years, then really wanted to come back to Nepal and do something entrepreneurial. And in that quest, I met some of my seniors with whom I co-founded Upaya City Cargo. It's a logistics startup that's enabled by tech. It's sort of trying to help become the digital backbone of Nepal. And recently, I also graduated from LSE with my master's on social innovation and entrepreneurship. Putting that to use, currently, I'm involved in 2 things. A social enterprise in the US that is trying to make Nepali tea renowned in global markets by selling Nepali tea and tea-related experiences such as tea tasting, tea tourism, and so forth. And then I'm also involved in King's College Nepal, not the one next to LSE, but King's College Nepal, where we are trying to redesign higher education space, particularly when it comes to entrepreneurship education in Nepal. So I'm partly involved there as well. And so today I've invited Tim from the Nepali ecosystem. And I've invited Tim not just because he invested in my startup Upaya, or not just also because he has been my mentor in my highs and lows and has supported me throughout that. But the reason Tim is here is he's the founder and CEO of Dolma Fund Management, which manages Dolma Impact Fund 1 and 2. Together, the asset under management is over 100 million. And also, Dolma Fund, what that has done to the ecosystem here is it has really kickstarted the venture financing space by investing in renewable energy, healthcare, and tech. And also, Tim also has a global market understanding of how the global market operates because of his past experience and expertise in the global markets, but he also has enough experience in the local ecosystem, right? So he'll be able to articulate things about Nepali ecosystem from a global macro point of view, but also from a local expertise point of view. And he is also a Nepali Jwai, and in English, son-in-law, for Nepali son-in-law, and also in Hindi, Nepali Jamai or Damad, right? And so he can also probably articulate things from a professional, but also a personal touch to his own endeavor in the Nepali ecosystem, which will be very helpful, hopefully, for the audience here today. And so thank you, Tim, for making that time, and looking forward to hearing more from you.
Awesome.
And with that, I'll pass it on to Sharan, maybe.
Hey, everyone. And yeah, thanks for that introduction, and thanks, Taylor. So my name is Sharan Agarwal, and I'm the LSE Generate International Ambassador for Mumbai. As far as my career goes, I'm an active angel investor, instrumental and formative mentor, entrepreneur, and a VC fund advisor. I studied my master's in finance and private equity from the London School of Economics and graduated in 2016. And what has actually drawn me the most to Generate is the focus on socially driven entrepreneurship and my desire to actually give back to the school by being able to contribute in the area of my expertise, which is the startup ecosystem. So I want to not just give back in the form of these events, but also in the form of mentoring startups, which is why I've become one of the official mentors for LSE Generate for the startups that I both incubated and accelerated. Also, Generate has an incredible community of entrepreneurs. It's a global community, and this has been very attractive for me. Today, I've invited Sachin Tagra. He's a close friend of mine, and he's the managing partner at JSW Ventures, before which he was the head of Capital 18 in India, which is it's in the media sector. He's a fellow angel investor as well, and in addition to his current role as JSW Ventures, and he's also on the board of directors of several startups. JSW Ventures is a tech-focused fund in India that invests mainly in growth stage startups and Series A, Series B as well. I'm sure Sachin can shed a lot more light on that than I can. And he has a holistic understanding of the Indian startup ecosystem, right down to the problems faced in rural India. And so I felt that he would be the perfect person to share his knowledge on the Indian startup ecosystem with everyone. And I first met Sachin as a co-judge at a spot funding competition at the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay called the 10-Minute Million, which was actually featured just yesterday in Forbes. And so, yeah, I just thank you for taking out time to be with us here today, Sachin. And without wasting any more time, I'm going to hand it over to you three, Sachin, Tim, and Taylor, and you can start the fireside.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna unpin them, so we'll see their faces again very soon. But all right, excellent. Yeah, I really enjoyed the intro because it's always great to hear the rationales behind why we wanted to hear from somebody instead of just any regular VCs. And it sounds like both of you have already really enrooted your influence as well as your investment strategy locally, and has make reputation of being the sector leader in investment. So it's lovely to have you both here. But I think to start off with, I do want to say that every hero always has their own origin story. So we'll be interested for us to kind of understand a bit more around why did you decide to become an investor? Why did you choose, particularly for Tim as well, why Nepal?
Why Nepal? Do you want my honest answer or do you want my analytical answer?
Could be both.
I'll give you the honest answer because I married a lady from Nepal, as Amigo said, and that got me involved in the country. I ran and still run a charity called Dalma Foundation, which helps educate children in remote Himalayan areas. And I ran that for 8 years, but that was the time of conflict. There was a Maoist insurgency in Nepal. So I was in private equity in Singapore, in fact, and I've been in private equity around the world. And I always wanted to bring that to Nepal because I knew that they could really use that capital a lot more. And there was a peace process in 2006, a peace agreement, which has been very successful. I think it's held as one of the best peace processes, most successful. And so by 2011, I think most people were sure that conflict was not going to slip back into conflict. And I think that's the basic foundation that you need for private sector investment. So we raised our first fund, we closed it in 2014, and now I still run in parallel. I do one voluntarily, the Dalma Foundation, but I run the Dalma Impact Funds as Amigo introduced them.
That's excellent. It seems like in the future, when you're writing a memoir, you probably have a lot of stories to be within.
There's a big story about meeting my wife, but this is not the forum.
Yeah, movie adaptation. It sounds like it's coming.
20 years ago, I first came to Nepal.
Excellent. Sachin, what about you?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Taylor, for having me here. And good evening, everybody, to join this session. Just brief introduction of mine. Out of my 22, 23 years of my career, first part was running businesses for large corporates in India, which includes Reliance Retail, Times Group. And then in 2013 or so, when entrepreneurship was just picking up, I started doing a couple of personal angel investments. And during that process, I loved the space so much that I moved to a large corporate to invest for them. So I've been investing from last 10 years. It's been very satisfying to be in that space because you happen to meet the young, smart, bright, high energy, professionals, young guys who are looking at things very differently, looking at the innovations or bringing innovation in the ecosystem. And then our job is to help them, go through that phase with whatever experience we have, provide them capital, provide them other support. So I think this is not just a pure commercial interest. It also brings a lot of satisfaction of seeing something which is from a seed stage to a growth stage. So now I run a fund which is called JSW Ventures. It is sponsored by one of the large corporate houses of India, which is into infrastructure, steel, cement, paint. And we have also raised external capital. We have been running this fund from last 7 years. We have one unicorn in our portfolio. As I said earlier, we've seen the journey from a startup which had 20, 30 employees to now they are having a 2.5, 3,000 employees. So it's very exciting to be part of that ecosystem. And also to give a perspective on India, India has really changed in the last 10 years from the time I jumped into the space to what we see currently. Just to give you some numbers, we had 4 or 5 unicorns in 2013 or 14. Now we have about 108 unicorns in our country. The investment money or number of deals used to be about 1.5, 2 billion. Last year, we did deals of about $30 billion in the VC space in the startup ecosystem. We used to do about 250 deals, and we did about 1,800 deals last year. So I think the ecosystem has really evolved in terms of and we really focus on technology businesses. And, in India now, we have about 800 million people who are using internet, about 380 million people who are using the digital payments, about 200 million consumers who are doing e-commerce and paying through it. So, there has been a huge change over last 10 years, in the startup investing space. And we don't see this slowing down. This is only going to multiply from here. Yeah. So, to me, it's the best space to be in as a professional. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great story. So yeah, I think like a lot of the things that we do these days, like especially as Generate, like it's very much like centering the social interest, because we believe that it's like, like a human first and human science like institute, like there's always like something that we can contribute to the environment, as well as kind of like the social system that people are going through every day. It's not just about like making money, which a lot of people I think like do think when they're like seeing or like forming perceptions around like VCs, forming perceptions about startups, it has to be like something that's like, magnificent, immediately like raising. But sometimes even when it's like a steady for-profit like company that could like, sustain and like help people from the communities, that's also quite a good achievement that people are trying to make. I guess my another point is, it's quite interesting because it's very like mature economy. A lot of people would be like, driving themselves towards some sort of like sector verticals that they are seeing a lot of earning potentials from. But whereas like in developing economies, a lot of the times like people have sort of like, very much like grassroots attitude around like just building something to help like the neighborhood out, things like that. Do you still see that trend as relevant as it is as maybe like 5 to 10 years ago within your ecosystem? Because I know that obviously India these days is becoming like the third largest in the world now, and then whereas like in Nepal as well, the competition is definitely intensifying. Do you still see that like kind of mentality being instilled in like the founders' mindsets these days?
Tim, this is for you. Yeah.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go with order.
So look, a few years ago, entrepreneurs in Nepal didn't know what venture capital was. And when we started, so 2014, sure, there's lots of innovators that want to solve social problems. And there are still, I think the difference now is that the culture of global entrepreneurship has swept across the world through borders. The culture and the technology of the internet and the cloud has been a massive enabler. So I think, it's a great leveler. So whereas in 2014, Nepal was decades behind India, in 2023, Nepal's a few years behind India. And I think that is because of the digital revolution. So I think what we see now are a lot of people, a lot more homegrown. It used to be that we had a lot of entrepreneurs that we invested in that had come back from abroad, got their experience, their degrees from abroad, and so had those perhaps developed market ideas. But now we're seeing a lot more homegrown entrepreneurs.
What about you, Sachin? What do you think?
I think the entrepreneurship is becoming a mainline now in the careers of young mind, which was not there a few years ago. And thanks to media, both the audio visual medium and the print medium, I think they have created a lot of heroes in India from entrepreneurship. We have a Shark Tank show in India. I think it is hugely popular show. So to me, that is bringing a lot of excitement in the ecosystem. And, with the strength of the capital and the ecosystem players like yours, incubators, accelerators, actually helping accelerate the ecosystem. And now people, they have an aspiration to become a co-founder rather than an employee of a large organization, which is a great change, which we have seen over the last few years.
Can I add to that, Sheila? Because I think what Sachin is getting at is the importance of role models. So, and this is especially true in South Asia. I remember our first employee saying, how am I going to tell my parents who have sent me to Colorado to get an MBA, and I've come back to Nepal and I'm going to work for this little venture capital fund no one's ever heard of. I remember, and that is a concern. We've given you an education, go work for the government, go be an engineer, go be a doctor. Now I think startups are an acceptable thing, especially in India and increasingly in Nepal. And as people see more and more success, they know it's more and more possible. And that is especially true in a place like Nepal, where it's been very traditional career routes. And showing entrepreneurial success and broadcasting that success, I think, is a great role model that helps pull people into more productive and hopefully more socially aligned business models.
Yep, definitely. And another follow-up questions, I suppose, it's quite an interesting one, because I know in India, I think I read the statistics just before this session that every day they have about 2 to 3 new startups just blooming from nowhere. So that's quite impressive data for sure. In terms of raising investment, because I think, Tim, you have some interesting ideas around, you think Nepal may potentially be slightly even a better playground for startup founders to actually raise investment. So what's the hot take here? Would you mind to share that a little bit?
Well, I mean, India is so yesterday, isn't it? Sorry, I'm joking. I think there are real differences and also real synergies. So India is a much more competitive market than Nepal, and that's competitive from a capital provider's point of view, competitive from a product or service that the entrepreneur is creating. If you look at Nepal, it's a much thinner ecosystem, which means if you have a decent fund and you can add value, you're more likely to get the good deals and hopefully at a better price. So I think, that's the fundamental difference, is one, when you're playing catch up in Nepal versus India, and you're an early player like Dolma, you do get good deals. So I think that's one difference. You can also see, although the countries, Nepal's got a population of almost 30 million, obviously it's not a touch on India, but it's a fairly big country in European terms. It's the same size as Malaysia. Population. So you do have quite a big market with much higher growth rates because they're much more untapped. But again, I think, one of the differences is Nepal's terrain, obviously the Himalayas. So getting broadband out there, our most recent investment was the largest private equity investment ever in Nepal. It was $15.3 million, not that big in Indian terms, but it was in an ISP. And it was for expansion for fiber into more rural areas than the typical cities. And I think that's the game changer that we're looking at, to really sort of include more of the population.
Absolutely, Sachin. What's on the same topic as well, then what's your take around, having all these people competing against each other? Is there a way that people are galvanizing the energy, or instead it's a very much healthy peer kind of competition environment that people are working in?
I think in India is very healthy, if you ask me, both from an investor perspective and even founder perspective. At a business level, they may compete, but as an ecosystem, I think we come together very cohesively. Our venture capital association in India is super active in terms of working with government in terms of new initiatives. And even founders have their own, networks where they meet, they discuss, they share knowledge. So, and the market is so large. I don't think so. There is sort of a competition. Sometimes on few deals here and there you compete, but I don't see that as a big challenge in the ecosystem. To me, it's a very cohesive ecosystem, and that is one of the reasons we have been able to scale up so fast in our country in last few years. That VCs or investors really go out in promoting the entrepreneurship and promoting more people to join this bandwagon. And of course, raising large capital to help those founders. So I think it's fine in India. It's good, actually.
Right. So in terms of the government support, are there any grants that people could apply for? Or how does one kind of almost scale up if they're trying to bootstrap without raising money immediately?
So there are, two large, or actually 3 or 4 large schemes going on in India. One, of course, there is something called Atal Incubator Mission. Where government is promoting a lot of incubators and accelerators, which is government-funded incubators accelerator. Plus, the Indian government has 10,000 crore fund of funds, which they have given to an organization called SIDBI to invest in other VC funds. So there is sort of a multiplier impact which government is creating by investing in other VC fund. In our fund, Government of India has invested along with other family offices and institutions. So there is a similar fund for promoting MSME, again, fund of funds. So I think government is taking a lot of actions in promoting entrepreneurship and creating a multiplier impact rather than investing themselves. So good part is government doesn't take a decision of investing directly in the business, which is a good thing. They give it to professionals to manage that money. And as a fund manager, one needs to give the returns back, and our incentives are linked giving the returns to government. So I think it's a very healthy ecosystem government has created for startups.
It certainly sounds like that. Tim, what about Nepal? Are there any kind of grants that entrepreneurs can immediately go for once the political uncertainty has already settled? Is there like infrastructure that are really beneficial for people who are thinking of starting out?
Not from government. I think the players for grants are the development agencies, USAID, the British, a lot of government-funded, usually national-backed development agencies. And so you see companies going to them. I think with the Nepal government, there's 2 problems. To be fair to them, they don't have the money. And they certainly don't have the expertise, if they did have the money, to generate that ecosystem. So what we see is, probably now 10 or so private equity funds of different kinds, coming together. We've formed the Nepal Private Equity Association. We lobby to the government, but it sometimes feels like we're trading the government. Rather than the other way around. So I think it is the private sector and the international development agencies coming together to help Nepal initiate reforms, regulations that would help the industry. It doesn't feel like it's coming from government.
That's definitely...
Sorry, Taylor, just to add on, actually, these, the initiatives which I mentioned were by the state government, by the central government. There is also a lot of initiatives by every state in India. So it is not just the central government which is promoting these entrepreneurship or these initiatives. Even state governments are also promoting a lot of such schemes in India now.
Yeah,
nice. That's good to know. Yeah, contrasting to what we have in the UK, which is quite a balanced kind of like varied, funding channels. This is definitely like new stuff for me to like hear about. It's very cool. So I guess my next question is quite an interesting one, because I read some statistics online around that 95% of the startups apparently in Nepal are all concentrated in Kathmandu, which I believe is the capital. So Tim, would you mind to maybe shed some lights around like the tier 2 or tier 3 or tier 4 cities that we have going in Nepal? Like how are the how are the ecosystem thriving over there? And then as well as for Sachin as well, if you want to maybe walk us through some of the innovation hubs that we've got in India, is there any other places that we have to pay attention to, apart from Mumbai or Delhi, the obvious locations?
So Nepal is very Kathmandu-centric. It's by far the biggest city. It's where most of the deals happen. It's where that culture spreads. Other cities do have opportunities, and we do have investments. Obviously, renewable energy plants, hydro or solar, are almost by definition not in the cities, but also manufacturing. So we have invested in manufacturing in other urban centers. But I think beyond that, it's very Kathmandu-centric. And I'm coming back, I can hear myself talking about a theme of this digitization. I think what we are seeing now is not necessarily the startups happening, but the effects of the startups. So the ISP WorldLink we just invested in has just opened a line in Jumla, which is a fairly remote town in the Himalayan region. And so what's that going to do? So, you know, the obvious things are, well, telemedicine, edtech, online banking, fintech, all of that stuff. But I think as interesting as that, some of the companies we have invested in, especially in providing AI services, and some of those jobs, many of those jobs, thousands of those jobs are not very technical. They're actually annotating data or photographs or video clips to feed into AI engines for American or European clients. So these are the kind of jobs that you can do with just you speak English and use a web browser. That's really the skill set that you need.
That's encouraging.
And what we're seeing is, because of the Kathmandu-centric nature of Nepal, you're seeing a huge depopulation from the rural areas. Some of that is to emigrate, to go abroad, but I'm sure a lot of people would rather stay in their home regions if they could and stay with their families. So it's jobs like this, you know, fairly low-skilled jobs that broadband could enable. At the moment, all the people work in the major cities. There are 4,000 people working for Cloud Factory, the company I'm talking about, throughout Nepal, but they're almost all in Kathmandu. As broadband spreads, there's no reason why you couldn't sit in a much more remote town, do the work, and then, of course, the work, the pay is much more substantive relative to the local economy. So I think what we're going to see as companies come from Kathmandu, they're either providing a service or they're providing employment. And I think that will be a game changer for local economies, and hopefully slow or stop this urbanization and the depopulation of the rural areas.
Yeah. If any of the audience comes from our human geography degree, they're definitely loving this conversation. I can already tell.
Well, I can also see a lot of, I won't name them, I won't put you on the spot, but I can see a lot of Nepali names on this call.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah. Sachin, what's your view around like maybe on the same topic around like depopulation? I know that India is such a vast land, so people are probably migrating everywhere, relocating all the time anyway, but is there like a hotspots for people to like look at if they're wanting to find out more about startups?
Sure, Taylor. You know, I actually gave a talk on this topic last week only, and it is available on YouTube on CNBC about, you know, the entrepreneurship in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So I'll give you a few data points. Out of the 80,000 registered startups in India, 80% come from non-Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore. So only 20% startups are in, you know, these 3 metro cities. Of course, there is a concentration of the success of these startups in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore. But last year we had 23 unicorns, and out of 23, 11 unicorns were from, again, non-metro cities, which is about 40%. So there is a significant change happening in terms of the concentration moving from Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore to smaller cities. And now the ecosystem is getting developed. You know, I mentioned about the state schemes. Now, there are also a lot of angel investors which have come up in a smaller city. So they are helping promote entrepreneurship. The big advantage, the startups have is the low cost structure in smaller cities in terms of, the salaries, the rentals, and, living with the family, as Tim mentioned. So I think these things are actually a big value add for startups while they are working on their initial concept, because you need to be in a low cost environment. You need a smart, intelligent workforce who will live with you or will stay with you for a longer period of time, which is probably high probability versus in a metro town. So keeping these things in mind, actually, I feel the newer innovations or the large ideas will come from smaller cities. And especially if they are focused towards the consumers of those smaller markets, they will also have a much better pulse of those businesses when they are in a smaller city and also catering to those kind of consumers. So it's an advantage. And over next 5 years, I see tier 2, tier 3 is actually becoming a main innovation hub rather than actually the large metros.
Right, that's good to know. I think what I'm hearing from both of you is around the deployment of tech as well as maybe cost maximization. So on that note, during the kind of funding winter in like an environment that is slightly more conservative than like a few years ago, has your investment strategies kind of pivot a little bit, like based on, the recent incidents, the macro kind of like, factors that are coming at play as well? How have you like looked at when you're like, assessing a startup and their scalability?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, we do have these three sectors, and it's been a good thing. You learn about portfolio diversification at business school, but when there's a major downturn, things like energy plants, a hydropower, a solar plant, it's going to generate the same cash flow. We've got one listed on the stock exchange. It's held on the Nepal Stock Exchange. It's held its price very well, despite the local economy, like pretty much every economy in the world, having higher interest rates, having inflation. So I'm very glad that we had diversification. Healthcare, if you take, I think pharmaceuticals is very resilient. Hospitals suffered a lot during COVID, not just because of the rush, but because of the non-rush. Right after the main rush of the pandemic, nobody wanted to go to hospital for a long time. Now things are back. So that's fairly resilient. And tech is where the changes are happening in terms of our investment strategy. So, the grow the top line at all costs has gone. I think it's gone everywhere. It's going to be, are you either already EBITDA positive? Do you have a direct path to that? Do you have enough diversification of revenue so that if you did lose that big enterprise client, you can keep going? We're a lot more analyzing the downside, and we're still investing in tech. We're just doing it slightly differently. But certainly as our valuations have come down on the tech side, just because the comparable multiples that we're benchmarking our valuation against have come down, probably tech, energy has risen. So, it's up and down, but I think, the obvious statement of diversification is key, is the right one.
Sachin?
We have been investing from last 7 years, and, we invest in pre-Series A, Series A company in platform and SaaS businesses. SaaS is primarily India to global, and platform businesses are India to India. I think from a demand perspective, nothing has changed India to India. From the India to global market, there is a slight impact, but I think the scale of the startups we have invested in, they're too small to feel that large impact. So from our investment strategy, not much has changed over the last 7 years. We still have capital, we have commitments of the capital, and we continue to deploy at the same pace what we used to. And even from an ecosystem perspective, in the early stage space, not much has changed in terms of number of deals. In fact, the volume went up 4% last year. The quantums may have come down, and the time required to close the deal or work with investors have increased because we are doing more diligence on the profitability or EBITDA positive or path to profitability. I think that part is taking a little more time. So not much has changed from our strategy. We continue to invest. Late stage companies, they are feeling a little more pinched in terms of the valuation, and also able to raise a large capital if they are a high cash burn businesses. Those are surely impacted, but fortunately in our current portfolio of fund, 2 out of 6 companies, 2 are in that stage, and both have raised large capital, and they are almost near the profitability. So we don't see challenge in our current portfolio at all, and we continue to do deals in the early stage.
That's definitely positive news to have. In terms of Indian or maybe Nepalese founders raising money outside of the borders, because that's something that European founders tend to do a lot. They immediately look at the North American VCs, or maybe like the VCs coming from Asia as well. They're quite keen to explore, like, you know, multiple options. Is that tend to be the case for like the founders coming from your country? And if they wish to do so, is there anything, like any tips that you can maybe like give them when they're assessing whether they should, you know, like spend time investing energy to actually like look outside of the country, or maybe they should like just look within at the existing options they are, or like how would you recommend them to approach that almost?
I'm going to let Sachin answer as I stop my hotel phone from ringing.
Sure.
You know, so I think there is a significant capital flow happening in India from other countries. So a lot of global VCs have already set up shops in India. So investors really don't need to go out, founders don't need to go out to look for investors. Second, of course, you know, with the investment banking channel available, if you are more focused on a specific sector and you're looking for a investor from that sector, then of course there is an outreach possible. But now, you know, with the new setup in India, which is through GIFT City, where the foreign capital can come in much easily versus what it used to be. It used to come from Mauritius or Singapore route. Now we ourselves have a judiciary called GIFT City. Capital can come through that route. So it's not a challenge. So depending upon what founder is looking for, capital is available within the country, both from Indian investors and global investors. At the same time, if the founder needs to have a specialized investor from other parts of the world, you know, they are reaching out through investment bankers.
Sure. Yeah.
I think the problem in Nepal for external capital, and if I keep this to, there's a different thing going on with infrastructure, longer term, high capex, and that's currency devaluations. So I'm going to keep that to one side because we're largely talking about kind of tech venture capital. The problem Nepal has reaching outside its borders is scale. Scale of its companies, really, not so much the market potential. So it's ticket sizes. So if you're going to go to, you know, and ask for $3 million from Silicon Valley, I'm not sure those ticket sizes exist, certainly not for Nepal. And so where we have been successful is where companies have reached, you know, at least $25 million worth of revenue. And I have to say, even that, we invest in companies, that was a British company that raised 65 million. Its operations are in Nepal, but actually the shares that we're raising are from a UK company. So I think it's much more difficult. I also think that foreign investors are looking for markets that they can redeploy skills. So if they get to learn India once, they're pretty sure they can have a lot more deals in India because of the size of the market. And we have tried, but I've often heard, you know, Nepal, it's a small sort of weird country with some strange rules. It's really not worth my time for the ticket size involved. So I think the answer here is, now I am sitting here in Mauritius, I have to confess, not in Nepal, because this is where our funds are. So although we are international, of course, we act like a local fund because we're really targeting Nepal. So looking to Dolma, there's other great funds like BO2. There's a whole nother set of funds recently licensed by the Securities Exchange. So I think looking to those or the grants available are really the way to get. And once you've reached that certain scale, to us, that was 25 million in revenue, then I think you can look abroad. And then we were successful in bringing in American VCs.
Awesome. So how about people that are ambitiously aiming for either of the markets as like a new place for them to expand a business to? Is there any cultural differences, regulations that you think they should really like be considering around, like, you know, like starting a business or maybe just like pushing the product over there? Is it a favorable, would you say, environment for external businesses to come in to play?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sachin.
So Taylor, India being one of the large consumer markets, I think most of the businesses want to participate, whether it is a startup or a developed business. So I don't see that as a challenge. But of course, India comes with a lot of its own, market dynamics in terms of the ability to pay, the highly price conscious, low trust market. So if any business has to launch in India, of course, they need to adopt to the local environment and local economics, which I think, every business has learned it hard way over a period of last 20, 30 years. Now, we don't see that challenge when the MNCs or even global businesses come to India. They adopt themselves. And even for startups, I think, I'm sure this is going to be true. Any startup who's coming from the other global market and investing in India or opening in India, they have to adopt. We have seen, whether it is Uber, whether it is Airbnb or any large startup which has come to India, as well accustomed themselves to the Indian market before going deep into the market. So I think that's a very natural learning process for startups.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there have been MNCs in Nepal for decades that have done extremely well. Unilever, Coca-Cola, Standard Chartered Bank, and they've been extremely profitable. I think, and obviously the market's a bit smaller, but they'll scale for that. And largely what they're doing is they're not manufacturing much in Nepal, they're manufacturing in India. And importing those products. So you'll see they're really sales and distribution arms. I think the real opportunity cross-border is from India. So, I'll give you an example. One of our investees is an e-commerce company called SastaDeal. They have been working with Flipkart, a sort of giant version of themselves, if you like, and leveraging their technology, their products. They're now the exclusive seller of Flipkart products in Nepal. So if you want to buy Flipkart from Nepal, you go to SastaDeal and you go to the Flipkart section and you can order various things. They're just launching another line, so you can order individual products much faster. Delivery. So if you look at that example, I spend a lot of time in India, talking to similar larger companies, either just to learn what were the pitfalls that Indian companies went through to reach that scale, or possibly to tie up strategic partnerships like the Flipkart SastaDeal one. But either way, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. There's a lot of technology that can be used that's already been developed. So I think the commercial opportunity for Indian companies, particularly Indian tech platform companies, to expand into Nepal is really very easy. Similar language, no visa requirements, very similar culture. So I would hope to see more and more of that. People who have spent their money building out in India to expand into Nepal is really very, very easy. I think that's also the case with healthcare. So we are talking to a number of healthcare brands who have got chains of clinics, for examples. Hospitals, I've noticed some of the big Indian hospital chains going to Bangladesh, going to Uzbekistan, really creating not just an expansion of their brand, but feeders for more serious operations into India, sorry. So again, we're talking to a number of Indian healthcare brands. So I think just the fact that India is that much further ahead, it's a fairly low-cost expansion to move in and expand into Nepal alongside the MNCs that are already established.
Okay. Is there any kind of like publications, or is there like kind of platform or like things that you think people should really follow around, like so that they can find out a bit more around like your particular ecosystem? Do you guys have any recommendations, like anything interesting, like journals?
Follow us on LinkedIn. So I can say follow the journey. It's great fun. Amigo might have some facts. I think the Nepal Private Equity Association. There's a group called IIN. You might know the proper name of, Amigo.
Yeah, I think there are a few. We're still scrambling to find the right source for multiple things, and that's also where an opportunity is right now. But there are bits and pieces, different initiatives from different sources. And I think maybe for the attendees in this call, once we scrabble together some information, we can share it later on as well.
Yeah, Taylor, so there are more, there are enough publications in India who are covering startups, what is going on startups, is actually more than what you can absorb. So to name a few, like VC Circle, Your Story, Inc. 42, Startup Daily. So there are so many, which is, if somebody is interested, I think Twitter is full of, the startup news and breaking stories. I think there is, and that's the interview question I asked all the candidates who want to join the fund, that what publication they read and what is going on in the ecosystem to understand, because if somebody is really keen to become an associate in a VC fund and not very active in reading in the startup space, then it's not a best situation to be in. So I think there is enough material on the net to read about startups in India.
Yes, I think independent research is a very critical skill that all successful entrepreneurs share. I do believe so. I think just one last question to close this off, and then we'll allow the audience to have some time to ask questions, so they can also start submitting anything that they may like our speakers to cover as well. I think just one last question around. In terms of the investors that you have in your country, what are the trends that you're seeing them investing outside of the country? Is there anything that they would particularly be like drawn into? Like if people are wanting to approach maybe like an investor coming from India or Nepal, like how should they do it?
Not sure I fully understood the question.
So the question is around, are there any trends within, for example, your fund, if they were to be international, like are there any trends that they would like particularly pay attention to certain kind of sector verticals where they are kind of like operating outside of Nepal? Like, is there any kind of like tips around if I were to, like come in touch with an Indian investor or like a Nepalese VC, and I want to like kind of like gauge their kind of like attention around my own company? Is there anything like for them to do? Is there any kind of like recommendations or guidance around that, how to best approach that?
I think the easy answer is that a Nepal VC is restricted, cannot invest outside its own country. It has very strict capital controls. We can, because we're domiciled in Mauritius with international investors, but and that's how we're able to invest in UK, US AI companies that generate a lot of jobs in Nepal. But Nepal has a fixed peg to the Indian rupee, and it has to defend that peg. So it's very worried about money going out. You're basically not allowed to do it. It's against the law to send money out, unless it's the repatriation of FDI money that came in. Of course, that is allowed. But I don't think that would be a possibility for Nepalese investors.
When we raise capital from investors, we generally have to define the geography where we'll invest in. So we are primarily India-focused fund, though our regulator allows us to invest about 25% of our fund outside India. And we do make some investments outside India, but they are all, again, linked to Indian founders or India in some sense, that either they need to have a development center in India, or the team needs to be based in India, or the market should be India if the company is in US. So there are multiple things. So, that is difficult to sort of give a tip. But if somebody is building a business in India, but domiciled outside, we are happy to look as a fund.
Same with us.
Excellent. Great. So I think we're probably going to go into the Q&A sessions for the last 5 minutes or so. If there's any questions from the audience, you're more than welcome to just submit it in the text box, then we are happy to answer that. But as for Sharan and Amigo, do you have any reflection about the talk that we've just had as well?
Only thing that keeps coming to my mind is like, I'm trying to see where Nepal is compared to where India was in its own startup boom journey in the last decade itself, right? I was debating whether it's around 2016 when Jio finally came, made internet cheap, and sort of spread it everywhere, where from that day onwards, like from Pan Pasol to the auto rickshaw, all that, everyone started hopping on the internet. Are we at that stage? Are we pre that stage? Are we post that stage? So I was just trying to draw parallels, thinking, and also trying to sort of expect the growth that we can see based on that as well. So yeah, it was just a phenomenal conversation in that regards. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I think it was very interesting to see the parallels between the two ecosystems, how similar they are in certain ways, and at the same time how different they can get in terms of the size, of course, regulations, the sectors, all these different themes that were brought out and explored and spoken about. It was extremely interesting. In fact, I really wanted to ask both of you all if you have a moment about what, in your opinion, has been your biggest success story and one failure. Because, I mean, we always talk about successes, but many people don't talk about failures, right? So if you don't mind sharing, that would be something interesting.
In the VC space, when you invest, it's always a high risk capital. So when you invest, you see, every business becoming $100 billion unicorn or, something like that. But, sometimes these things don't go as planned. So in your portfolio, you will always have something which is not gone as per the plan of what you envisaged. To me, that's sort of a failure of both investor and a founder together. Because we couldn't deliver of what we envisaged to do it, and I think this keeps on happening in our industry.
We haven't had a failure as in a company went bust, but I think I would consider a failure. We had an investment. I won't name it. We kept on looking at the quarterly reports. The accounts receivable are getting bigger and bigger. This one particular, it was a manufacturing company, this one particular distributor wasn't paying its bills. It turns out it's owned by the founder, and he's basically using the company we invested in for his piggy bank. So, those sort of things I consider failures, because we didn't catch that in due diligence. And, obviously the trust was breached. In fact, in that case, what we did is we had a clause in our contract to convert our preference shares, and we took control of the company. That's a now really successful pharmaceutical manufacturer, but it was a nightmare at the time. It almost failed from a cash perspective, but I think it's that breach of trust. I think our biggest success has been exiting in part that Cloud Factory investment, where we went out to raise 25 million in the US and we raised 65 million. And because it was oversubscribed. They were in the heady days of 2019 when tech was, much better. But it's interesting to note that another investment of ours in the US, Fused Machines, is very much a AI algorithm developer. And while times were bad until ChatGPT came out, there's suddenly a boom in that particular sector. So I think, you kind of make your own luck. You could say both of those deals are, one, we went out to market when the market was really hot for that kind of tech AI type company. Is that lucky? But you have to have a good company to get oversubscribed, right? Another one, we've suffered a lot during the pandemic, lost a lot of revenue. Suddenly it's boom time because ChatGPT has come out.
I've got a direct questions asking around social impact. Since we haven't covered that at all today, because we have limited time. The person is interested in understanding, like, as a social enterprise, like how does, like, traditional VC with a traditional business model, like, measure or kind of like almost understanding the success? Is there like a different kind of like standard that they are being put on? Like, if they are a social enterprise, how do you then, like, evaluate them? Is that something that you just see as like embedding, I guess, like from my understanding, like as a company mission, but perhaps it's like a secondary thing? Or are you seeing that more people are starting to like valuing that a bit more when it comes to making an investment decision?
I wish we had more time because, we are an impact fund. Although we firmly believe that you shouldn't subsidize returns to generate that, because I think that does the whole market. It's really interesting. My experience of this is that Silicon Valley was really not interested in some of the things our companies were doing, some of the training programs. You're negotiating with a VC and they're putting red lines through some of the costs. But they do listen. If you really argue that, a training program, a wellness program, some of the things that sound a bit fluffy really help bind a company together through that impact mission. And if you take that mission away, you really take the culture that's driving the corporate growth away. We have won those arguments. I mean, they are pragmatic people, but you have to be able to defend the social mission.
Yep. Sachin?
Yeah, when you're promoting entrepreneurship, you are anyways making impact in the ecosystem, so it's creating jobs, it's, adding value, building value in the country. So there is always an impact when you invest in a VC. But, referring especially as a impact fund, that's not the first criteria we start with, that's the outcome we look at. And but there are funds like Tim mentioned his fund, and even in India we have a lot of funds which are focused on social impact. In fact, what I read recently that in last 5 years the amount of investment in the social impact on the founders have gone 5x in India, and almost 15 to 20% of the investment is happening in the social impact sector.
Wow.
So that's a large sum. So in an economy like ours, which is growing and still not developed, I think there is an opportunity for both funds to wear that hat, and even the global capital actually, which comes through VCs, also support a lot of social impact, which is good for the ecosystem. And entrepreneurs like this who are focused on social impact will surely have an advantage while they go to social impact fund rather than a general fund.
Laura has a questions around how inclusive do you think the ecosystem is in Nepal and India? Where do you see room for improvement?
I'll speak for Nepal. Inclusive in gender terms is doing great. I attend and speak at graduation ceremonies. I usually find more than 50% female graduates. Our fund management team was until somebody left recently, 50% female. I'm not saying that's the average, but where inclusivity isn't happening is in the caste system and disabilities and the rural-urban divide. So we're still seeing significant underrepresentation of lower caste and people with disabilities. It's something we're actively working on.
I think there is a potential to improve the inclusivity in Indian ecosystem, both from an investor perspective and from founding team perspective. As a fund, of course, My second partner she's a female. So, we try to promote that in our, fund. And similarly, out of the 6 active companies in Fund 2, one has a female founder, one startup. But there is more to be done in that space. We consciously look at it while evaluating those startups that, they need to have a good strength of female founders or female employees along with the male team. Yeah.
Great. I'm seeing an influx of questions now. I think we probably have time for like just one more. So let me just pick a good one. Let's have a look. How to use how to use the finance of I think I will find a better question. So there's another one. Can you provide some insights on the current state of the climate tech industry in both countries, and whether you believe that progress is being made in this field?
I would say a huge focus is coming on a climate sector after the technology investments, which was the phase or which is the phase. Health tech used to be the second, and now climate is probably the third one.
Mm-hmm.
There are now specialized funds coming in the climate space. And even the current funds, which are sector agnostic, are increasing their focus on climate. So I personally believe that there is a significant amount of capital and focus coming in the climate tech space. Yeah.
We don't see climate tech intellectual property being developed in Nepal. We invest to implement the climate tech, if you like. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of international climate finance, again, donor agencies, World Bank. We're actually working on an issue of green bonds internationally, wrapped by MEGA, part of the World Bank, to give it a higher credit rating, to bring in a lot more funding for renewable energy, at least. But Nepal is not a hotbed for intellectual property and climate tech.
Are you both able to stay on to answer just maybe one more question? I actually find the question quite interesting. A person is saying both of the countries has a huge informal economies. So it's probably they're referring to people that are like, tradesmen, people who are like selling F&B. A lot of those are quite informal. Do you have any kind of like suggestions or like understanding around like how can people finance, maybe like filling the funding gap in the system via using the informal economy?
I think India leads the way in bringing people into the formal economy. So I'll definitely let Sachin take that.
There is no informal way of promoting, the unorganized or unregulated economy, I would say. So I think the money from investors will only come in the, businesses which are following the tax regime in our country. But that transition is happening huge because of the GST, which got implemented in, I think, 2016. We have seen huge formalization of economy after that. Similarly, it is the same thing happening in the personal income tax front. Government has put in very tight controls and systems, and more people are now, filing their tax returns and, paying taxes. With this, I think if you are an entrepreneur getting into the business, I think you should work with the formal economy and formal system rather than, just focused on the informal. That's not a long-term advantage in the business.
Well, I think the person asking the question is probably being agile, being like, a hustler that most entrepreneurs would be. But thank you very much for like being able to like sit with us and answer all these questions. And it's lovely, like actually it's echoing what Sharan was saying, like really hearing like the contrast between the two ecosystems. I learned so much about the regulations of Nepal now. If I'm ever going on an Asian trip for anything to do with impact economy, I feel like I have a lot about India and Nepal to say. So that's lovely to hear from the both of you. Just one last thing would be for everyone who is keen to stay in touch, here are the ways for you to kind of like follow all of us, and then like you can keep track of the news and updates. And as for the people that came through via the Generate channels, if you are wanting to ask us anything, wanting to get involved later on, maybe just for us to connect you with Houghton Street Ventures, If you're an LSE alum, then feel free to just email us below or follow us on Instagram. But other than that, yeah, like I think I'm happy to announce that this is the end of the webinar, and it's great spending time with all of you. So hopefully we'll see you in the next event very soon.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Amigo.
Thanks so much.
Learning. Thank you.
Good talking to
Bye-bye.
you.
Have a good evening.
Good evening, guys. Bye.